Hey class, we're Group G, Rafe Byers, Brittany Andrews, Jamie Neville, and tonight we're going to be discussing the performance standards for algebra in grades 4 through 8. We're going to go over the percentages of star questions that measure algebra in each grade level, and then at which grade is algebra more emphasized.
The STAR performance standards for math in grades 4 through 8 are lengthy, but we're going to summarize them here. 4th grade students should be able to solve multi-step problems and represent problems with an input-output table. In 5th grade, students should no longer need aids to solve multi-step problems and should be able to generate a numerical pattern and differentiate additive and multiplicative patterns in a table or graph. In 6th grade, there's a considerable increase in algebraic standards. Students are expected to understand and represent additive and multiplicative equations in a variety of ways, as well as identify independent and dependent variables and write and solve one-variable, one-step equations and inequalities. By 7th grade, they are expected to use various forms of representation. They begin using slope-intercept form and move forward to two-step equations and inequalities, as well as real-world scenarios. In 8th grade, reporting category 2 is almost completely algebraic. The goal is preparing students for algebra. They must have an understanding of proportionality, function, and slope as they start writing and solving equations and inequalities with variables on both sides. They must also look at two linear equations intersecting and solve real-world problems. This is a lot of information, and we found it much more helpful to look at release STAR exams to really understand the types of problems students will come across.
Okay, so our group looked at the answer keys for the 2013 exams and graphed the percentage of the problems pertaining to each of the 5 categories: probability and statistics, measurement, geometry, algebra and numbers, and operations. As you might expect, the amount of algebra increases from a small portion of the exam, around 13% in 4th grade, to nearly a quarter of the exam in 8th grade. Then we looked at the STAR blueprints, which is the breakdown of how much each of the categories expected on the exams. We noticed a discrepancy between the blueprints and the problems on the release exams and the number of algebra and algebra-related problems. Therefore, this raised the question: what are the makers of STAR exam calling algebra? Is algebra arithmetic using variables and numbers, or arithmetic with abstract concepts in the symbolic form? Is everything from proportions to solving systems of equations algebra? Where is the line, and how can some problems be called only algebra or only geometry? We wanted to look a little closer at one of the exams to try to answer these questions. We chose to look at the 6th grade exam because it should have some algebra, but not as much as 8th grade. And also, we have spoken to some 6th grade teachers about the experience with teaching for the STAR exam, so we had a little insight as well. The released answer key from the 2014 6th grade STAR exam says that 23% of the problems fall into the algebra category. We looked at each problem to see if we would consider it algebra. What we learned is that there is a lot of gray area and many problems don't fit nicely into one category or another. With generous interpretation, we found that 46% of the problems are algebra. That doubles what the answer key said the exam contains. So how can that be? We identified a few problems and tried to look at what the state considers algebra. So the next 3 slides, we're going to be showing you problems that are directly pulled from the STAR exam, the 6th grade STAR exam. Feel free to pause the video and read them because we're going to continue on explaining our reasoning of why we think it's in a different category or why we think it is in category 2 of algebra. Okay, this problem could be solved using proportions or a system of equations, but the exam gives an expression. In our opinion, this problem is on the border between pre-algebra and algebra, but STAR puts it in category 1. We felt it could possibly be category 2 algebra. These 2 problems are what we called crossover problems. They tie algebra to another category. Even though number 39 doesn't require you to write or solve any equations, it requires proportional reasoning to solve. However, if you didn't have any kind of understanding of geometry, this problem might be confusing to you. We called this geometry algebra crossover, but what STAR labels it as? Algebra. The problem on the right uses algebraic variables, but is also questioning your knowledge of the unit's measurement. Gallons and pints. This is a measurement algebra crossover, and STAR labels it as, again, algebra. These types of problems blur the lines between categories. These 2 problems really caught our attention. Number 36 tests your knowledge of percents and decimals. This is a concept frequently taught in algebra. Number 51 tests your knowledge of decimals and fractions. Is that algebra even though it doesn't have a percent sign? In 6th grade, the concepts of converting between decimal, percent, and fractions is all taught in one unit. So are these two problems in the same category since they require very similar skills? Well, number 36 is called algebra, and number 51 is called numbers and operations. This also blurs the lines and makes it difficult to tell exactly how much algebra is present on each exam. After reviewing the STAR test, we decided there are more algebra problems on the STAR test than what is stated on the 2014 6th grade blueprint. Problems are split into readiness at their grade level and supporting the next grade level. The standards are split into majority supporting with some readiness, but the breakdown of the problems doesn't fall into the same proportions shown on the blueprint. How can so few problems fulfill all of the supporting standards that the STAR is trying to cover? The standard setting is very ambitious, and educators must prepare their students for all standard categories, even if they won't be covered each year on the exam. This is a distribution we already talked about from the answer key. After we reviewed and questioned a few problems within the STAR exam, we began to look over the blueprint for the 2015 STAR. The categories have been altered, changing statistics into data analysis and personal financial responsibility, and grouping measurements with geometry. That's not the only difference, though, as the blueprint shows a very different distribution of algebra across the grade levels 4 through 8. The updated blueprint for Category 2 is stating 20 algebra problems for the STAR test in April 2015. How accurate is this blueprint? From what we found, algebra content is fuzzy, and so the blueprint is best used as a guideline for preparing the students rather than a rule book. Knowing this information, we as math teachers should prepare our students with a well-rounded sense of algebra because it is to be expected throughout the exam consistently in grades 4 through 8.